Hello. We read when we can, and sometimes it's between chores. And so I'm going to try to read chapters 3 and 4 of The Christmas Quilt by Vanetta Chapman. Oh, here we go. I've got bread rising over here, so I'm going to read while it rises. Adam had completely disassembled the small gas-powered portable handsaw. You wouldn't think there could be so many pieces, but he had over 20 on the work table in front of him. Nothing appeared broken, but there'd been enough dirt on the inside of the engine to keep it from working properly. He suspected when he put it back together, cleaned and oiled, it would run fine. The sound of a horse and buggy pulled his attention away from the project. Wiping his hands on his pants, he stepped out into the early afternoon sunshine. "It's too nice a day for a farmer to be inside the barn," Samuel declared, unfolding himself from his buggy. At 6 feet tall and steadily gaining weight from Annie's cooking, he was a big man. The weight he needed to gain. For too many years he had resembled a scarecrow. For too many years after the death of his wife and child in a winter storm, his grief had kept him from enjoying life. "Yeah, you're right. It's a good day to be outside, but my work is in the barn. Everything in the fields is done. You'd know since you helped me harvest." Samuel slapped him on the back. "Why didn't you know you taken apart today?" "Small gasoline-powered handsaw. You don't say. Made by Irvin Hochstadler?" "Who else? Then we know it's a good product." "It is, but even a handsaw made by Hochstadler has a limit to the amount of dirt it can handle. A mechanical engine is like the human body, Samuel. It has to be treated with respect." Samuel held up his hand. "No need to lecture me. I've heard you speak on this before, and I believe you." Seeing what Adam had laid out on his workbench, he let out a long, low whistle. "Taking it apart, I could probably do, but how do you put it back together?" "It's not so hard. I always start at this end of the table." Adam indicated the right side of the bench. "Top to bottom, right to left. My process never varies. They go back together in the same order they came apart." Together they walked the length of the bench until they came to the skeleton of the chainsaw. "Not much left when you're done disassembling it." "True. A few minutes before you'd arrived, I'd finished cleaning all the parts. Now I'll go back through and put them together, being sure to properly grease each part as I do." "You make it sound easy." Adam ran his fingers through his beard. "I suppose a good memory helps, but then you remember your herbs and what to give for each ailment." "I have a few books I refer to," Samuel admitted, perching on a sawhorse. "I have one or two myself. If I'm stumped, Leah and I will take a ride to the town's library." "Leah's actually one of the reasons I stopped by. I wanted to see how she was doing." "Oh," Adam glanced toward the house, shook his head, and then focused on the engine again. "She and Annie aren't back from town yet." "Didn't figure they would be. I saw Belinda yesterday and she updated me on Leah's medical stats." Samuel ran his palm over the sawhorse. "Belinda was the one who suggested I stop by and talk to you." "To me?" Adam's voice squeaked like the hinge on the back kitchen door Samuel had been intending to oil. "Why talk to me? I know next to nothing about pregnant women." Samuel laughed. "Pregnant women, maybe, but I imagine you know plenty about Leah." "You might be surprised." Adam began piecing the small engine back together. Working on the engine felt good. At least it was one thing he was confident he knew how to do. "Why would Belinda send you to talk to me?" Though the day was cool, suddenly sweat beaded along Adam's forehead. "Is something wrong? Is that why you're here?" "Nothing's wrong. Belinda thought maybe Leah wasn't being completely open with her. Maybe she wasn't feeling well, or she was worried about something. Belinda tried to get her to talk, but Leah clammed up tighter than a silo in a winter storm. So she asked me to come and talk with you, see if there's anything she should be concerned about. We want this pregnancy to go as smoothly as possible, no surprises. Adam stopped pretending he could focus on the engine. At this rate, he'd make such a mess of things it would likely resemble an English blender when he was done with it. Sticking his hands in his pockets, he turned and trudged toward the open door of the barn. The sunshine on his face helped. It didn't provide any of the answers he'd been searching for, but it helped. Adam, are there any surprises we should know about? It's difficult enough to birth twins at home. If there's anything you can tell us. Surprises? Seems to me there's been nothing but surprises since the day Leah learned she was carrying my child. The words weren't easy for Adam to speak. They echoed in the barn, sounding to him like a confession. But he wasn't sure exactly what he was guilty of. If he had known, he would have gone to the bishop already. As it was, he continued to toss sleeplessly each night, usually on the couch in their small living room. Samuel joined him in the patch of sunlight coming through the doorway of the barn. She was sick at first, I remember that. You make it sound as if she had a cold. It was so much worse, Samuel. Leah spent several hours each morning in the bathroom clutching the toilet. I'm grateful we don't live in a district that still insists on outhouses, or my wife would have caught pneumonia. She spent so much time in there. I'm sure it must have been hard. I wasn't allowed in there, Adam continued. For 2 years, nearly 3, we shared everything. Suddenly she didn't want me near her, as if she was embarrassed. Maybe she was. Adam reversed direction, nearly bumping into Samuel. Why would she be embarrassed? It wasn't her fault the babies were making her sick. We didn't even know at that point there were 2. 2, Samuel. Do you realize how exciting it is and how terrifying? I'm not sure I can be a good dad to one, but we'll have 2 at the same time. Let me see if I have this straight. Samuel walked out into the sunshine, to the pasture fence where he could see the workhorses Adam had allowed out for the afternoon. Leah had a bad case of morning sickness, which lasted longer than most. It had barely ended when you learned she was pregnant with twins. Yeah, I suppose the timing is about right. How have things been since? Adam noticed that Samuel wasn't limiting his questions to asking about Leah anymore, but he didn't call him out on it. I don't know. How are things supposed to be with a pregnant woman? She doesn't sleep well, so most nights I sleep on the couch. I don't want to wake her when I get up at the crack of dawn. And her moods? Adam threw his hands up in the air, about the same as a donkey you might be tempted to purchase. Not that I'm comparing my Fra to a donkey, though her temperament is similar. Samuel grinned. Cranky is normal. Oh, not always cranky. Sometimes she cries on the top of the temper. Samuel laughed outright. You're giving me something to look forward to with your... And it's a German word that I don't know how to say it. Schwester. You know that, right? You're the doc for our district. I'm not a doctor, Adam. Fine, herbalist, whatever you want to call yourself. You've helped Glenda birth plenty of babies. You birthed them yourself when she couldn't be there. I think you would be used to pregnant women. Samuel pushed his hat more firmly on his head as the buggy pulled into Adam's lane. Tending to a woman who is expecting a child is one thing. Living with her is another completely. That's it. That's the best advice you can give me? They moved closer toward the women. I'm not going to pretend I have the answers, Adam. Leah needs to know you love her. The boplin will be born soon and you'll have more sleepless nights ahead. Before you know it, though, you'll have your bride back. Adam wasn't so sure about that, but when Leah first caught sight of him, when she raised her hand and waved and the smile he knew so well covered her face, he temporarily forgot all about the things that usually stole his sleep. for that moment he could trust what Samuel had just told him was true. Annie was anxious to get home and speak with Samuel. Leah had finally opened up to her a little on the ride home from town. She didn't think her brother's wife had shared everything bothering her, but she'd shared enough. She'd like to have stayed and fetched a rolling pin and threatened Adam with it. Somehow she didn't think that was in keeping with the ordinance. Too bad, because Adam was one stubborn guy. She should know from her years growing up in the same house with him. Maybe Samuel would have some ideas on how to talk some sense into him. Maybe Samuel had experienced similar feelings when his first wife, Mary, was pregnant. Annie didn't bring up Mary and Hannah often. She didn't want to break open old wounds, and it would seem the death of his wife and child, though the accident had been over 10 years ago, would still be a painful thing. Samuel had made it clear when they married that no topic was off limits. She trusted him when he said it. However, she would only ask about Mary if it seemed prudent to do so. Perhaps Samuel would have some ideas about her brother without having to broach how he had reacted to his first wife's pregnancy. So far, he'd been completely patient with her. But then, she had none of the complications Leah had endured yet. Thankfully, they had nothing scheduled for the afternoon except a simple meal for dinner. They had done the cleaning for tomorrow's luncheon the day before. She might have also have time to work on the quilt. She was happy with her pattern. If she could gather the correct templates, maybe she could begin on her sample square. Pulling into the lane to their home, Samuel's buggy tagging along behind hers, she was surprised to see a buggy waiting near their front porch. She didn't recognize the buggy at first, but as she drew closer, she did recognize the couple, Jesse and Maddie Lapp. They lived on the outer edge of their district, an older couple in their 60s. They seldom came to town for anything other than the twice-monthly church meeting. Annie didn't bother driving her buggy to the barn. She pulled up beside them, barely taking time to wind Benny's reins around the front porch railing. Fortunately, her mare was well trained and content to be home. The Lapp's mare, however, seemed agitated. Annie took a moment to pat the neck of the animal and murmur a word of peace to her. Mr. Lapp was still in the front seat of the buggy, though it was plain he had not been driving. Maddie had been. Now she was hovering over her husband, whispering to him. She didn't so much as glance up as Annie approached their buggy. "Jessie, Maddie, is everything all right?" Samuel was beside her by the time she'd reached the door and peeked inside. Annie could tell immediately that something was terribly wrong. Jesse lay back against the buggy seat. His breathing was shallow and his skin clammy and pale. "I'll fetch my bag," Samuel whispered. "Don't attempt to move him." "How long have you been here, Maddie?" "Maybe 30 minutes. We didn't know where else to go. Jessie was having the pains again, so we waited for them to pass. When they didn't, her hands came out and fluttered around as if she had no control over them." Though she was talking to Annie, her eyes never left her husband's face. She seemed afraid to glance away, afraid to take her eyes off him, even for a second. "I didn't know what to do. He didn't want to get in the buggy, but I didn't know what to do. I made him get in, practically had to drag him. Was that the right thing to do, Annie? He won't talk." "You're talking enough for both of us, woman." Maddie was Annie's height and still worked hard around her farm each day. She had added weight through the years, but her arms were strong. Annie had no trouble picturing her hitching up the wagon and driving it to their porch steps before dragging Jessie up into it. How long would that have taken? Annie allowed a small smile. "It seems he hears us fine." She angled around Maddie. "Jessie, I want you to lie down across the buggy seat. Can you do that for me?" The fact that he didn't argue with her was a worry. What Amish man would lie down in the front of his buggy without protesting? If she had been compiling a chart, she would have written that Jesse's appearance was similar to most men in their 60s who had the potential for heart problems. Though thin men certainly had heart problems, it seemed to Annie that often there was a particular shape, whether English or plain. Jesse had it, the pear-shaped stomach and barrel chest. It was a stereotype, but as one professor had taught her, medical stereotypes exist because they are often true. Maddie's hands fluttered over his chest, his beard, his cheeks. Oh, he's dying, isn't he? I know it. Oh, my sweet Jesus, he's headed home. Maddie, Annie automatically fell into the role of nursing. She kept her voice calm but firm. Maddie, look at me. Samuel was back. Annie had to pull Maddie out of the buggy so Samuel could squeeze in and use his stethoscope to check Jesse's heart rate. He's dying, Annie. Maddie's voice raised to a near wail. He promised never to leave me and he's dying. Maddie, I need you to help us. Can you do that? The older woman swiped at the tears flowing down her face, pushed her hair back into her cap and nodded. I need you to go into the house and wet a cloth, wet too, wring them out well so they're not dripping, and bring them back. Also bring me a glass of water. Samuel will have some aspirin for Jesse to take and he might like a sip of water. Maddie nodded but remained frozen in place. We'll stay with him, Maddie. What if he goes? What if he goes while I'm gone? We're with him, honey. You go for the cloth and don't forget the glass of water. As soon as Maddie was hurrying toward the house, Annie pushed her head back into the buggy. Samuel was crouched in the floor area and Jesse was still lying across the seat. Heart attack? Appears to be. Jesse, how are you feeling? Not so good. He didn't open his eyes, but his voice had gained some strength. Blood pressure's too low, Samuel muttered. Jesse, have you been prescribed any nitroglycerin pills? Jesse shook his head no. Annie heard the front screen door to their house slam shut. She glanced up in time to see Maddie running toward them, running with the cloth and glass of water. Samuel pulled the bottle of baby aspirin from his medical bag. I want you to chew 2 of these for me. They're going to help. Jessie struggled to sit up. Annie hurried around the buggy in order to position herself behind him. As she rushed around the back of the buggy, something told her she might be too late. When she arrived at the other side and saw the expression on Samuel's face, she understood then what had started as a beautiful winter Saturday was turning into one tragedy. That's the end of chapter 3. Now chapter 4. Annie stared at Samuel as Jesse clutched his chest. Maddie hadn't quite reached the buggy, but she would in another few seconds. She would see Jesse was having another heart attack. Annie, run to the barn. Use the phone to dial 911. Go now. Samuel's voice was calm, but it received no argument. He had dropped the unopened bottle of aspirin back into his bag and had already begun loosening Jesse's collar. When Jesse slumped back against the seat, slumped back lifeless, Samuel began to administer CPR. Annie backed out of the buggy, nearly tripping over her dress. Maddie saw her and stopped. She dropped the glass of water and the dish towel in the dirt. Where are you going? To the barn. Help Samuel. Annie ran, thanking God as she did that the bishop had allowed the phone installation a year ago. It was a phone much like those in the shacks dotting the countryside throughout the community. Bishop Levi had decided that with Annie and Samuel married, and with them both helping meet the medical needs of their district, it was prudent to allow the exception to their rule of no phones. She ran and placed the call, even as she heard Maddie crying. And as she went through those motions, she prayed for God's help, for Samuel's strength, so he could continue performing CPR until the ambulance arrived. For Maddie, so she would feel a sense of calm. For Jesse, so his heart would beat again. For herself, so that she would know how to help. For God's will. The emergency dispatcher informed her it would take 10 to 12 minutes for an ambulance to reach their address. She hung up the phone and returned to Samuel, but this time she didn't run. This time she was more mindful of the child she was carrying inside her, though she didn't think running would hurt her. Many pregnant women were joggers, but she wasn't used to running, and this was a stressful and emotional situation. So instead of running, she walked quickly and focused on remembering all her training on the cardiac ward. It had been a mere 6 weeks rotation, and it had taken place over 3 years ago. In the hospital, they had an external defibrillator, which she had used one time. She and Samuel weren't equipped with any such device. There would be no way to administer an electrical shock to Jesse's heart if it had stopped beating completely. No, they could only do their best to provide what medical care they were able and continue the CPR, which she could see Samuel was still performing. "I can do that," she whispered. "They trained me at Mercy Hospital." "Nah, I'm good." Sweat was beading on his brow. How long had he been at it? 3 minutes? 4? Maddie sat on the ground beside the buggy, weeping and praying. The German words flowed out of her, out from her heart and onto the cold ground. Annie crawled into the buggy, placed her fingers gently against Jesse's wrist, though she didn't expect to find anything. "Samuel, he has a pulse. It's weak, but..." Samuel stopped pumping on Jesse's chest and placed his stethoscope there. "Yeah, his heart is beating. How long until the ambulance arrives?" 5, maybe 6 minutes. "Try to get a blood pressure for me." She was already slipping the cuff over his arm. Jesse began to stir, though he didn't speak. "Glad to have you back, Jesse." Samuel knelt beside him in the buggy, next to Annie in the floor area, which was no easy task. "You gave us quite a scare." Jesse said nothing, but he did chew the aspirin Samuel slipped into his mouth. Maddie popped up at Jesse's name. "Is he alive?" "He is, Maddie. It would seem that God heard your prayers." Pressing the top of her head to the top of her husband, she began weeping in earnest. Annie raised her eyes from Jesse, from monitoring him, to glance at Samuel. They shared one of those priceless moments. A heartbeat of life she understood was precious. It would stand out in her memory, even when she was old and the curls beneath her prayer cap were gray. It reminded her of the time they had helped to birth Faith and Aaron's baby, the first miracle they had witnessed together. Surely this was another. At that moment, the ambulance hurried down the lane, lights flashing and siren blaring. "You update them," Samuel nodded. "I'll stay here." She ducked out of the buggy and met the paramedics as they were pulling their equipment from the rig. 2 young men in their 20s. They didn't seem surprised to be treating a heart attack victim in a buggy or being updated by an Amish nurse. Annie imagined they had seen it all. Within 15 minutes they had Jesse stabilized and Maddie in the back of the ambulance beside him, holding his hand. An intravenous drip had already improved his color. "What about our horse and buggy?" Maddie said, as the paramedics prepared to close the doors to the ambulance. "We'll take care of both," Samuel assured her, "and we'll send word to your place for someone to tend to the other animals. You stay with Jesse. They'll most likely need to do surgery." As a look of anxiousness washed over Maddie's face, Samuel stuck his head further inside. "Keep praying, and so will we. I imagine the bishop will arrive at the hospital before the surgery. You're not alone in all this, Maddie." He helped shut the door on the back of the ambulance, and then it pulled away and left behind a river of silence. They stood there a few feet apart, watching it go. Samuel turned and studied her until Annie grew self-conscious, suddenly aware of the dirt on her apron, the way her curls had escaped her cap, and how sweaty she had become, even in the cold. Finally, he closed the gap between them and laced his fingers in hers before leading her up the porch steps. "You did very well, Nurse Annie." The blush started slowly until it crept all the way up her neck and along her cheekbones. When had Samuel last teased her by calling her Nurse Annie? "Thank you, Doctor. You were quite professional during that crisis, as were you." For a moment there, I thought we were going to have 2 heart attacks on our hands, both Jessie and Maddie. He led her inside and insisted she sit at the table as he poured them both a glass of water. "Can you imagine it though, Samuel?" He didn't answer, only waited and watched her. She pushed on. It was as if her heart was breaking as his was stopping. It was as if they were one. Annie sipped the water. "I suppose such a long marriage creates a strong bond." Samuel finished his water and set the glass in the sink. Instead of sitting beside her, he squatted in front of her chair, pulled her hand forward and kissed her palm. "I think each year that passes, 2 hearts become more intertwined, like 2 vines growing side by side. Eventually it must become difficult to know where the beat of one stops and the beat of the other begins." Tears blurring her eyes, Annie nodded. Samuel reached forward and kissed her on the forehead. "Now I have 3 buggies to see to," he said, standing up and grinning. "If I'm not mistaken, I saw some quilting items in your bag." "For Leah's boplin." "I'll fetch it for you unless you'd rather nap. "Nah, I think I'd like to sew. I prepared dinner before we left. I'll place it in the oven, then go upstairs and work on her quilt." "Wonderbar, how long does the food need to cook?" "It's chicken. I'll set it for about 2 hours." Annie went to the gas-powered refrigerator and began foraging around in it. But as Samuel crossed the kitchen to head out the front door, she had to call out to him. It wasn't their way to speak of feelings openly. It was enough to work beside each other every day. But after this, after so close a brush with death, she felt a strong need to express what was pushing up against her heart, against her baby. He stopped, his hand on the door, an expression of surprise on his face. Her eyes met his as she cradled the chicken casserole in her arms. "I love you, Samuel. And I love you, Annie." 30 minutes later, she was upstairs, sitting in what she thought of as her sewing room. The top floor of her and Samuel's house had the staircase coming up through the middle section, surrounded by 3 bedrooms and a bath. He had purchased it years ago from an Amish farmer who had a growing family. There were 4 bedrooms, including the one downstairs. There were also 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. Annie realized many Amish still used outhouses. Leah's family had recently moved to Wisconsin, and some of the communities there didn't allow indoor bathrooms. She had always had indoor facilities and thought it would be a big adjustment to use the outdoor ones, though of course theirs was nothing like the English. The water came out slowly when you turned it on, and sometimes there wasn't as much hot water as she would have liked, but it was still better than an outhouse. Their bedroom faced the north, with windows peering out over the yard and the lane. Annie loved the view. She adored waking up each morning and imagining what might be in store, what might be coming down the lane. The bedroom next to theirs, the one with the windows facing east, she had decided to make into their nursery. Although she planned to keep her infant in a cradle in their room for the first month, she didn't intend to keep her there for long. It didn't take English training to convince her of the need for babies to be in their own bedrooms. Her mother had been quite free with advice. "Parents need privacy, Annie. You keep your infant close until her feedings are down to once a night, then put her in her own room at night. You'll hear her if she cries, and you and Samuel will still have your time for intimacy." Annie smiled at the memory as she laid out her material for Leah's quilt. The 3rd bedroom, the one across from theirs, and with a small window facing south, had seemed perfect for a sewing room. She argued that they might need it for another baby, but Samuel had said, 1 year at a time, Annie. So he and Adam had carried the heavy treadle machine up the stairs, and he had made her a fine table for laying out her patterns and cloth. The pattern she'd set her heart on, a 9-patch crib quilt. Her mother had made an all-hearts naive crib quilt for the other twin. That pattern called for 3 squares across, 4 rows down, and hearts appliqued in every other square. Annie had seen it last week, and she wanted to complement the traditional Amish colors her mother had used. In fact, remembering the pattern her mother had chosen and studying the pattern in front of her, she thought it might be nice to put a heart somewhere in the quilt she was making. And she didn't happen to have a template for a heart applique. Her 9-patch pattern called for her to alternate a sunbonnet Sue and an overall Sam in each pattern. Okay. In each square. Perhaps she could adjust her pattern so that she could place a heart in one of the squares. Then it would coordinate with what her mother had sewn. After all, she was following the pattern, but more than that, she was making something special for her niece or maybe her nephew. She smiled at the thought, and her mind darted back to Jesse Lapp. How was he? Was he even now on the surgery table? Was Maddie alone in the waiting room, or had Bishop Levi made it there to stay with her, to pray? To pray with her, strengthen her, and be a comfort? Annie propped her chin in her hand and gazed out the window toward the barn. The door was open. Samuel had moved both of their buggies inside, but the Lapp's mare was giving him some trouble. Samuel stood there between the house and the barn. He appeared to be talking to the animal, holding a bucket of oats in one hand and brushing her mane with the other hand. Life was like that, wasn't it? Sometimes easy, other times difficult. The unexpected happened, and then you did your best to help each other through it. She was worried about Maddie, and she was also concerned about Leah and her babies. Maybe she could pray while she quilted, pray and put her concerns aside as she decided which colors to place on which pieces of the quilt. Adding the heart applique was a good idea. It would help to convey to Adam and Leah how much these children were going to be loved. The ray of sun through the window had slid down the wall, and Annie realized her time for sewing was coming to a close for the day. She needed a few more minutes to finish planning her quilt, choosing which colors she would use for which pieces of the pattern on Leah's quilt. She had enough light to find what she needed. She searched through her basket of fabric again. Where was the dark blue? She had some left over from the quilt she'd sewn for the charity auction last summer, at least a yard, which would be enough if she cut her pattern carefully. Maybe it had fallen behind the sewing table Samuel had constructed for hers. Setting aside the basket, she lowered herself to the floor carefully. She wasn't yet in the 5th month of her pregnancy, barely even showing, but she'd promised her husband and her ma'am she'd stop hopping around like a jackrabbit. As a nurse, she knew exercise was good for her baby. It was easier to appease her ma'am than argue, though. Once on the floor, she proceeded to crawl around on her hands and knees, searching under the table for the fabric. Lose something? Samuel, Annie popped up, knocking her cap nearly off her head and releasing a cascade of curls. Let me help. What are you searching for down there? Samuel's tone was scolding. After nearly 2 years of marriage, Annie recognized it, but his eyes were laughing with her. Fabric, I seem to have lost some, but spying a splash of blue in the back corner, she snatched at it and stood up. Found it! I could pull the table away from the windows, then you'd be able to see behind your treadle machine. Nah, I love the view and the light is good here. Usually good when there aren't so many shadows. They both looked out the upstairs window of the farmhouse. A giant maple tree blazed with red, gold, and brown leaves winked in the last of the winter sunlight. Yeah, the afternoon slipped away from me, she agreed, but I'd rather them as it is. All right, but next time let me hunt for any lost fabric. Agreed. Samuel studied the pieces she'd laid out, lavender, purple, 2 greens, 2 blues, black and white. Let me think. The colors suggest a manly sort of quilt. Manly? Did you see the purple? You're adding that dark blue. You know it's the baby quilt for one of Leah's babies. I told you I was working on it before you went to the barn. What type of pattern? Samuel asked, combing his fingers through his beard. A 9-patch crib quilt. I wish I had started earlier. So I shouldn't expect it for my Christmas gift? No, you shouldn't. Annie's cheek reddened in spite of herself. Samuel's gift was finished and hidden already. A slate gray sweater she'd spent all of October knitting. Leah's babies are due December the 28th, Annie finished for him. We talked about my tardiness today, and she laughed. Everyone says I'm a fast quilter. Twins often make an early appearance, it's true, but I wouldn't worry too much. It's only a quilt. I know. I'd like to have it finished before they're born, though. Annie began stacking the fabric carefully. And I know you'll do your best. Samuel peered at her pattern as if it were a book on herbs, but she knew he was thinking of something else. No worries, Nurse Annie. Soon enough your project will be done, and our midwife will call for your help delivering your niece and nephew. How do you know they will be a girl and a boy? She's carrying them low. I've seen it before, Samuel winked as he shifted closer to her, lacing his fingers with hers. Once you start on something, you need to focus on it wholeheartedly. I suspect you will finish your quilt for the bopping early. I do have plenty of time, at least 6 weeks. I was there when Leah went for her prenatal visit last week. And everything's good because I spoke with Glenda earlier today and she seemed to think the doctor that told Leah there's nothing to worry about. I'm glad she agreed to see the doctor, even though she plans on using Belinda to deliver the boppling. Annie started to tell him about her and Leah's conversation in the buggy. Was this the right time, though? It wasn't actually about Leah's physical condition. Wonderbar, Samuel patted his stomach. Would you like me to help you with dinner? Dinner? Samuel, I forgot about the casserole. Annie attempted to pull her hand from his to hurry past him and out of the room, but he caught her in his arms. No need to rush. I checked it when I came inside. Smelled burned, so I took a peek. Burned? Her voice rose like a screech owl. Appeared mostly black. I think you'll have to leave it all for me. Annie ran her palm along his cheek, then leaned forward and kissed him once. It wasn't burned, she whispered. I would have smelled it. Maybe not black, he admitted. She kissed him again. I confess, the chicken was brown and the potatoes seasoned perfectly. Would you like me to go down and finish things up? I would not. She slapped him on the arm and pushed past him. I can prepare dinner for 2. 3 soon enough, he called after her. Yes, 3, she smiled to herself as she heard him running water in the bathroom sink. They would eat and spend a quiet evening together. She would tell him her worries about all Leah had said after they ate. Samuel would know what they should do, if anything. Quilting for the afternoon had been exactly what she needed to spend a few hours doing, though she hadn't started sewing yet. Focusing on the fabric and the pattern had helped calm her nerves. Now to feed her starving husband.